In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the water pump on this Lexus IS250. This is located at the front of your engine. We'll have to remove several components to get to it, so let's get started. At the front of the engine, right behind the radiator, you'll see the radiator cap. Let's remove this. Make sure the engine's cold, of course. Turn it counterclockwise. Sometimes you might need to press down on it in order to release it. It'll click once and then it'll click again, and only then can you pull it off. Set this aside. Underneath the vehicle on the front where the radiator is, typically there's a shield here. Mine is missing, but you would either want to partially remove it or completely remove it with a 10mm socket and a trim tool for some push clips. Or if you reach around, you might be able to access this because that shield is supposed to have a hole for the coolant to drain through, so you may not even have to remove it. Regardless, turn this counterclockwise and unthread it. That will allow coolant to drain, and we'll just let this completely drain. This is done draining, so I'll thread this back in to close it off. Make sure that it's snug, but it's plastic, so once it bottoms out, tiny bit extra, put some pressure on it, and that's it. Wipe off anything that's still dripping, and then if you had a shield right here, put it back on. Now we have to remove this cover, and it's just held on with a bunch of push clips, so we'll go around, pop them all out with a trim tool, and then remove the cover. We have to remove this air intake duct, and it's clipped on with a push clip on one side and a bolt on the other side. Let's start with the push clip. This is the style that you have to press down to unlock it. Using a trim tool, remove it. On the other side, it should be a 10mm headed fastener. However, mine has been replaced, so I'm using a Torx to remove it. Now you can lift it and pull on it sideways to unhook it from the airbox. And there it is. Set that aside. Let's remove the lower radiator hose off of the thermostat housing. So at this point, this should be a spring clamp that you pinch with pliers, but someone's replaced it for me. So I'm just going to use an 8mm socket to loosen this up, but whatever clamp you have here, remove it so we can release the hose. With it loosened up enough, you should be able to slide it back. And now, twist the hose, break it free, and pull it away. Right above, there's this little hose with a hose clamp. We have to remove it because this is going to be somewhat in the way for us to access one of the bolts. So grab some pliers, pull the clamp off, gently twist it, and pull it off. Now there are 3 10mm mounting nuts to remove. 2 you can see right here. The third one is across from them, so these actually form a triangle, and that third one is the tip of the triangle. Now let's pull this hose clamp off and push this hose away, and this will give us access to our third mounting bolt or mounting nut for the thermostat housing. I'm going to use my hose clamp pliers because these can keep pressure on this hose clamp to keep it loose. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for me to push this down since that foam insulation is in the way. So now I can start prying down on this hose. Be very careful when you do this. You don't want to damage the hose. Okay, looks like I broke it free. Let's try to gently push this off. All right. There, grab that clamp, move this hose. This has coolant in it, so just be careful. Let's remove the upper radiator hose from both ends. So we'll pinch the clamps, move them aside, and pull the hose off. Set this aside. We have to remove this plastic cover, which is held on with 3 plastic mounting nuts. So you should be able to just grab onto them, twist them counterclockwise, and remove them from these studs. They are threaded onto studs, but they're just plastic. So you could put a socket on them. I believe they're 12mm in size. Remove this wiring harness. And then we'll pull this cover right off. With the belt still on, let's break free the 4 bolts that are on the water pump pulley. They're 12 millimeter in size. Use a wrench or a socket and break them free. If you're doing this with a hand tool, sudden bursts of movement, kind of like simulating an impacting motion, is what's going to help break them free best. Sometimes it's necessary to apply extra tension to the belt, in which case you could either grab the belt or the pulley and apply pressure, grab the tensioner and apply extra pressure, or they make a tool that goes in 2 of these 4 holes and it helps you hold the pulley, but you don't necessarily need that. Using a 14 millimeter socket and ratchet, or a breaker bar, or a serpentine belt tool, release tension off of the tensioner that's down here. Once you pull back on it, you should be able to remove the belt off of the closest pulley that you can get to. Once you have it off, release your tool. Just keep in mind it has quite a long throw, so you want to make sure that you're going to be able to release your tool once it goes back. Okay, take that off and remove the belt the rest of the way. You can reach around the other side to do that. And there it is. Using a 14 millimeter socket, remove the idler pulley bolt. And with the bolt off, the pulley comes off with it. Now there is this washer here. Make sure you save that. Right below that, there's the tensioner. We have to remove the pulley off of this as well. This bolt is reverse threaded, so you actually have to tighten in order to loosen it up. And take that off. Now finish removing the water pump pulley bolts. And remove the pulley, which sometimes gets stuck. It looks like mine's not, so take it off and set it aside. Now on the other side, let's take off this plastic cover. There's a push clip up here that we have to remove. It looks like a Phillips head screwdriver goes in the middle. Turn the center. Once you unthread that, you can pop the outer part of the clip out with a trim tool. And now 2 more of those plastic mounting nuts, just like we had on the other side. Try to break these free. I'm just going to use a socket to grab onto them. They're 12 millimeter. Pull this cover off. There are 3 10 millimeter headed fasteners, 2 studs, and 1 bolt underneath, which you can't really see very well unless you have a mirror, but it's pretty much in the center underneath it. I can feel it. And then with those out, we can remove this whole computer. I'm not going to unplug it. I'm hoping to just be able to push it out of the way. That way we don't disrupt any connections. Slide this off. Tilt it out of the way and make sure it's not pulling on any wires. Now what I want to do, especially right around here, is I have a lot of gunk built up. So I want to try to clean it up just a little bit before I take that water pump out. So that way I don't have to clean it later when the water pump is out, and I don't want to risk getting it inside of the coolant passages. So let's get some brake parts cleaner, a wire brush, and just very quickly try to clean this a little bit. Now remove this smaller hose that holds on the radiator or coolant overflow tank inlet. There we go. We'll just get that out of the way. 2 more hoses at the top. Let's pull the clamps and pull the hoses. We now have to remove this entire assembly. There are a total of 5 bolts holding this on. One is here, the other one is tucked right back here, and then 3 right down here. Let's take them all out, and remember, once you unbolt it from down there, coolant will come out and leak, so have a collection bucket underneath to catch it all. There's one last fastener we have to remove to get this thermostat housing out of the way, and that's this right here. So pull that 10mm mounting nut off. Now you can take this housing and slide it off. Coolant will come out, keep that in mind. All right, looks like I got it. You have to kind of force it because there's an O-ring on that crossover pipe. That's gonna get stuck. Oh, and the O-ring almost fell off. Okay. You don't have to remove this hose, but I will just because it's going to keep being in my way. So I'm gonna pull the hose clamp off of it and pull the hose off. Now let's break the water pump bolts free. There are some 10mm headed bolts, some 12mm headed bolts. We'll break them all free one at a time, going around, and then we'll back them all out and then remove the water pump. Have a collection bucket underneath. Coolant will start to leak at this point. It's already dripping. So let's remove all the bolts now. I have the new water pump ready, so as I take all these bolts out, I'm gonna put them in the holes that they go in on the new pump because there's so many of them and a lot of them will be different. I want to remember where they go and I want to make sure that they go back in the same spot. So like I said, I'm gonna take them out one at a time and put them in their corresponding hole. Okay, there's the water pump. We now have to clean up this surface. It's best to use a razor blade or a gasket scraper and just make sure that there's no debris, no corrosion, or any part of the old gasket left on here. Then we'll degrease the surface and of course install our new gaskets and the new water pump. I'm going to take a new razor blade and just gently scrape away at this so that I make sure, like I said, that there's nothing in the way of the new gasket sealing. What you want to avoid is anything that'll gouge the surface, this being aluminum. It's easy to do that with a screwdriver or any sort of very abrasive sanding disc or a sanding pad. So keep it gentle, avoid gouges, and of course, just make sure it's nice and clean. That looks pretty good for me. I'm going to wipe it, and then I'm going to use some compressed air to make sure I blow out all of these holes. It's very important that you don't have coolant stuck behind them. That'll actually hydrolock the hole, and it can crack the block when you put the bolt in. Or, well, I guess best case scenario, it strips the threads, but worst case scenario, it cracks the block. When removing the old gasket, you may have noticed that it's actually multiple pieces, and it's basically a sandwiched gasket of multiple layers. We have 2 paper gaskets and 1 metal piece in the middle, which is more like a spacer. Now, the 2 paper gaskets are different, and it's very important to put them in the right direction or on the correct side. Now, you want to have the gasket that has this large area here on the water pump side, and on the engine side, you want the gasket that does not have this large area on the gasket. So you want it cut out between these 2 ports. Here, you want it gasketed, so separated. And that's how this is going to get installed. Because there are no studs on the engine, I'm going to now add the water pump onto these gaskets and then sandwich it all with 1 bolt probably this top one because it's the easiest to reach, so it can secure everything on the engine block, and then I will add in all of the other bolts. Now, just as a note, I know I put my bolts in through the holes of the new water pump. I've actually transferred them over to the old one, so I can now put the new water pump on, and from the old one, I will just take one bolt at a time and put them in, just like when we removed them, to make sure that they all go in the correct hole. So have your gaskets ready, line up the new water pump, and now we'll bolt all of this onto the engine. I will actually start with the 10mm headed bolts. The 12mm headed bolts have to get thread sealer put on them. So I'm gonna start all the 10s in, that way it'll secure it on. Then I can apply thread sealer and put on all the 12mm headed bolts. Again, I'm just gonna take them from the old water pump and slide them onto the new. I have 2 started, now we can start the rest of them in. Now time for the 12mm headed bolts with thread sealer on them. Of course, I cleaned the threads in my wire wheel first so that everything can bond properly, and I'm just going to slide them in. If you don't have thread sealer, you could use some thread tape or some RTV, just a little bit. You don't need a lot, but you do need to seal up all of these threads on all of the 12mm headed bolts. All right, let's snug them all down. I'm going to go very gentle so that I don't damage anything or over tighten anything. I'm gonna start with the 12mm headed bolts, snug those down, just get them tight onto the engine block, and then I'll go around and do the 10mm headed ones, and then we will finally torque everything. Torque all of the 12mm headed bolts to 15 foot-pounds, and then the 10mm headed bolts to 8 foot-pounds. I'm going to start with the ones that get torqued to 15 foot-pounds because those will squish everything more, then we'll go to the ones that get torqued to less. Okay, so the 12mm headed ones are torqued. Let's torque the 10mm headed ones now. Once again, 8 foot-pounds for these. All right, let's double check all of them now. As you can tell, some loosened up. That's normal. As others get tightened, the first few will loosen up. All right, you could go around one more time if you wanted to. Mine are tight. There are 3 things we have to do in this area. One is install the stud that we can bolt the rest of the water neck assembly onto, or the thermostat housing, I should say. And this one, you don't need to worry about tightening too much. I will grab it with some pliers right here and snug it, but that's all I'm going to do because as soon as we tighten it down with the mounting nut, it's going to want to pull on both ends of the stud, and automatically will tighten it up. Now, the other thing we have to do is install a gasket. And this is basically just an O-ring, comes with your new water pump, and you place it right in this groove. Make sure it's seated. And lastly, we have to install the bolt that goes up here, which is technically part of the water pump torque. So let's bottom this out and torque this to 8 foot-pounds as well. Just like we cleaned the water pump mating surface, we have to clean this area here. This is where that larger O-ring seals up against that we just installed. And then this is where the smaller O-ring seals up against with the crossover tube. So make sure both of these areas are cleaned up, corrosion-free and debris-free. There is one more O-ring that we need to replace, and that's on this crossover tube. We have to remove the old one if yours didn't come off already. Clean the surface, inspect it. Everything looks good here, so the new one that comes with the water pump just gets slid right on here. There we go. Let's get this lower hose on and resecure the clamp. Now we can reinstall this assembly. has to line up with a stud down there, and of course the crossover tube at the top here. I put some silicone paste on the O-ring so it can slide on a little bit easier. Make sure all the hoses are out of your way, and keep constant pressure on it. Slide it in. There we go. Let's install these bolts that go in here. There are two that you can see the holes for, and one mounting nut underneath on that stud. A little bit more difficult to see. We also have the two bolts up top, one on the left and one on the right. We'll torque all four of these bolts and the mounting nut to 7 foot-pounds. All right, this is now properly secured. Let's put these two hoses back. Go on the back of the water inlet assembly. Slide these on all the way. And clamp them back on with your clamp. Let's put the water pump pulley back on. I put some anti-seize on the water pump where the pulley bolts on. I like to do that just so it doesn't seize in the future. And now, once you line up the bolts, start them in. Once you get one of them lined up, because the center is cut out perfectly, the other ones will pretty much fall right into place. I'm not going to worry about tightening them fully at this point. It's pretty difficult to do it unless you have something to hold the water pump with. So I will come back and fully tighten them once the belt is on. So like I said, for now, I'm just securing this by hand. Let's get this computer reinstalled. It has two studs that it lines up with. Slide that on, make sure it hasn't pinched any other wires that are there. We'll put the two mounting nuts back on those studs. Then there was a bolt all the way down underneath. Kind of hard to see, but you can feel for it. Snug all this up. Just going to double check all of these by hand to make sure that they actually are tight. All you really need to do is give them about 1/8 of a turn after they bottom out, and that should be plenty. All right. Right up on top we had this cover. Put that on. Two plastic nuts. You can just press them on. And we had a push clip that went in here. Let's put the tensioner pulley back on. Remember, this is reverse threaded, so loosen to tighten and tighten to loosen. Although the pulleys might look similar, they are different. So make sure you put them back where they came from. Torque this to 32 foot-pounds. This is a 14mm socket. I'm going to try to hold this in place so it doesn't move, because as I torque it, it's going to want to pull back as if I was releasing tension off of the belt. All right, install your idler pulley. Make sure the washer is on that bolt. Tighten it up and torque it to 32 foot-pounds. Now let's reconnect this hose down at the bottom. This is the one that had to have its clamp pinched while being disconnected, and of course the same in the opposite direction. Make sure that's pressed on fully, and reinstall the clamp. And this hose at the top, clamp this back on. And this one that comes from the overflow tank. Reinstall the lower radiator hose. If you had your spring clamp, put that back on. I'm going to tighten up my worm clamp. Be very careful with these if you're going to use them. You don't want to crush the plastic underneath and crack it. You also don't want to make it too tight to where it strips out, because then it won't hold tension. You just need to snug it, a little bit. Once you start feeling tension and you see that it has squished a little bit onto the rubber hose, stop right there, especially if you try to twist this and it can't move. That's plenty tight. Let's get our belt on. Here's the diagram of the belt routing on the screen. You can reference that when you put it on. You want to make sure it's following the correct path, otherwise it won't fit. I'm going to start on the crank and then I'll go from there. I like to do that because this is the largest pulley and probably the most difficult one to access on this vehicle. I'm going to have to release some tension to get the belt over the water pump. Then I'll reset my ratchet, release more tension so I can get it underneath this idler. Double check that the belt is seated on all the pulleys in all the ribs. It is for me, so I'm going to remove my tool. Let's put this cover back on here, line it up with the studs, and slide it on. Secure this harness on it and put on the plastic mounting nuts that hold it on. You can thread those in or push them if it lets you. Sometimes they can just kind of click on there and they'll secure themselves, or you might have to actually twist them. With the belt on, it will be a lot easier for us to snug up these bolts on the water pump. So let's grab a 14mm socket or wrench and tighten them up as much as you can. It's going to be very difficult to torque these, so snug is what we're going to aim for. Give them a couple bumps. If you feel the need to put extra pressure on the belt or hold the pulley in some way, do that if you think that these did not tighten enough by doing this. Reinstall the upper radiator hose, slide it over the radiator, and on the other end as well. Put the clamps back on, line them up with where they were before. That gives them the best chance to seal up. All right, now let's get this intake piece back in, line it up with the air box. Make sure you slide it in all the way. We'll put the bolt back on this side and the push clip back on this side. Now reinstall this cover and put back all the push clips that held it on. And that's installed. It's time to fill up our cooling system, and I recommend using one of these spill-proof funnels if you have access to one, because it makes it a whole lot easier to fill without spilling, of course, and it helps in the bleeding process. This is now the highest point in the system, and naturally air is going to want to rise up into this funnel as coolant gets pulled in. We're going to fill up this funnel and let it bubble out. We're going to keep filling it until no more air bubbles come out of the funnel. Once it has settled, turn the vehicle on and let the engine run. That's going to circulate the coolant through the system as the water pump pumps it through. Therefore, we'll push any excess air out of the system and pull in all the coolant. Turn the temperature of the heat all the way up inside the vehicle with the blower set to low so it doesn't cool the engine off too much, and just feel for it. You want to make sure it's blowing really hot air out of the vents so that you know the heater core is full of coolant. Once the engine is at operating temperature, the thermostat has opened up and the air bubbles are no longer showing up in the funnel, you know the coolant system is bled. At that point, we can remove the funnel. All right, let's pull our funnel off. Reinstall the radiator cap. Make sure you lock it in fully, and that is filled up.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.